everybody. Welcome to From Verbal to Visual Adapting Art for the Screen. Thank you all for coming. For me, at least, it is a late night panel, or not super late, but it's getting on in the evening, so maybe we'll have that late night vibe. I think it should be fun. We have some great panelists for you to talk about adaptations. A quick point of order: we are in Swooperton A on the Discord. And if you have any questions for us, if you could put the word question right at the start of it, I'll be able to find it later when I'm sort of combing through, make sure we can get to them. And yeah, we encourage that. Thank you. Make sure to send us some questions. So let's start out by introducing ourselves. My name is Luke Elliott. I am a writer of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. My short fiction has been published in Metaphorosis magazine, the Buckman Journal, and on the Overcast podcast. I have an MFA in writing popular fiction from Seton Hill University, and I'm a graduate of the Viable Paradise Writers Workshop. As for my experience with adaptations, I've basically been obsessed with them for the last 4 years after starting my podcast, Ink to Film. Me and a filmmaker co-host, James Bailey, have been releasing weekly episodes. So we're like 180 now. So I think it's safe to say that I find the process endlessly fascinating. So yeah, let's go around and each of us talk about who we are and then our experience with adaptations in particular. And let's start with Crystal.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Skillman. I'm a writer, dramatist that works in a few different mediums. My play King Kirby has been made into an four-part audio drama series at Broadway Podcast Network, but it's on Apple. You can get it everywhere, and we're approaching 11,000 downloads, which as a newbie audio writer, we're like, wow, that's awesome. So thank you for listening. If you haven't or experienced Jack Kirby's story, he created probably the very t-shirt you're wearing if you're a geek. And the piece explores why you know Stan Lee's name more than you know Jack Kirby's name, and that's what the point of the series is about. So I hope you'll check it out because if you're watching everything on Friday nights, you really will really love it because you'll see who created Captain America and who created Wanda. Um, I'm also the book writer of a musical called Mary and Max, which is adapted from a beautiful claymated cult kind of film. So it's animated, black and white with by Adam Elliott, and it's been adapted into a musical. So we have producers that we're working with on that. A little frozen at the moment, but doing development in the meanwhile. It had premiered in Canada and then in Austria. So we're looking at the American premiere. And so I'm kind of swishing also my experience into adaptation here a little bit. And also, I have a play, one of my first plays called Seven Variations on the Same Lover, recently adapted into a feature. Working with director Abigail Zealy-Bess on that. So those are kind of where I'm at with adaptation and kind of what's in the zeitgeist right now. I also have a scripted audio drama series called The Magician's Magician coming out this fall from Boom Integrated, and it's inspired by my play Open, which played in New York City a couple years ago.
Wow. All right, Zaza, how about you?
Um, I am Zaza. I'm coming from Georgia. I'm a writer, mostly writing for movies. I have one poetry collection also, which was nominated here. I created only first and I think the only one so far, Georgian Speculative Fiction Festival, which aims to promote some mythology from Caucasus area, and that's all I think.
Glad to have you. And Jennifer.
Hey, my name is Jen Kretschmer. I am a writer. I'm a TV producer, actor, streamer. I do a bunch of different weird jobs. I'm one of the authors on D&D's Candlekeep Mysteries, which is the most recent hardcover adventure. Thanks. I also have been for the last couple of years adapting Skin and Earth, which is a comic book by Lights, who's a pop musician, for TV. I also had a number of different projects in development, one of which was an adaptation of Mask of the Red Death that I've been working on for 15 years. That's never gonna happen because of the world right now. But yeah, I work in TV, film, and tabletop gaming for the most part. I also am the creator of the Accessibility and Gaming Resource Guide, and I do a lot of work in the disability rights field.
Awesome. So all of you have tons of experience in adaptations, it sounds like to me. So I'd love to just hear more about the adaptation process, if anything stands out from all those experiences that you'd like to talk about, and just indicate if you have something that comes to mind. Anybody?
I mean, I
Okay.
think the kernel of the story for me is always what matters. It's finding what the heart of the story is, and then finding how best to use the medium you're adapting to maximize what that story is about. So it's hybridizing, it's figuring out what your material is that you're working with and what it about it is speaking to you, but why the medium you're adapting to. Because if there isn't a reason, then there's no reason to do it. Let it live the way it is, I guess, which is a terrible thing to say.
Yeah, there's a reason why people love it, right? Yeah.
That's it. I think when somebody asks you to adapt or yourself try to adapt something, it means that the story is already loved by readers. So you have to be very careful to not to I don't know, humiliate the story and not to, how to say, betray those readers and save the story and do your things also inside it. And it's very difficult, and that's one of the main challenges.
It's really fun to be looking at that audience wise. You have this audience, it's scary as hell, but you have this audience that really, really loves it, that you don't want to let down. And at the same time, you have a whole slew of new people who are going to come to it, who are coming to it for the first time. And for each medium, I think it's asking how it lives best in that medium, and also what we don't see from the original, or what from the world. It's really about world building, which is why I think doing some work in TV, or developing materials for TV and animation, really helped me kind of look back at, we have the screenplay. There were moments in there that didn't make it into the film. What are those of interest? And also things that don't work, which is kind of interesting. So in Mary and Max, and Adam Elliott said that himself, he likes the framework, which people have only seen in German and Austria. So, and they loved it. So when it comes to America, hopefully it'll happen too. But that was very scary when we had done this original one that was a bit more faithful to the, it was definitely imaginative on stage. There's no way you can do the story of Mary and Max about a 55-year-old man who lives in New York City, who has Asperger's in the 70s, who gets a letter from an 8-year-old girl in Australia who has an alcoholic mom and needs a friend. There's just, that's so original and crazy, and they don't meet each other it's all detail oriented. The plot is really from details. It's really about people, and communication, that they're trying to get to know each other through letter writing. So there's no way that can't be original and different. And we'd really exploded that on stage, but for the audience, it was a lot. And I knew I was in trouble when in that first production, people kept being like, well, what if we change this ending? And the ending is what I wanted to keep exactly the way it was. And I was like, fuck, like, this is my responsibility. I have to make this work. So, we found this framework idea that we really loved, because in Mary Max, it had a narrator originally, but the narrator never paid off. You just heard this voice telling the story. And in the film, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Toni Collette are the voices. And so when we pitched that framework idea, we'd actually already done it, but we hadn't told Adam. I didn't even know my composer, Bobby Cronin, who's really amazing, was talking to Adam, and he was like, Adam loves it. He's like, why did I think of that? I was like, thank the Lord, because, Adam Elliott's a great writer, and many of his lines are gems that I wanted to keep and elevate his in the adaptation. Yet the framework gave me even more freedom to almost create a play in which the musical takes place, and that's completely original. That's my and working with Bobby story. So sometimes it's finding your own way in, but I would say that for sure it can never happen unless you're connected to the material. There's no way to adapt something unless it's in your soul.
I like that. So Zaza, I know you wrote a screenplay that was adapting one of your own pieces of fiction. And I was curious what that process was like, and did you feel like you had to give things up? Did you, when you were doing that, you feel like, well, this just isn't going to work for a screenplay and it has to go? And what was that process like? Did it hurt?
Sure. Actually, it was a great lesson for me because before adapting my short story into the screenplay, I didn't know many things about myself. And I found that I was not orthodox about giving up things and cutting off some things from my, changing things from my own work. I think that before that I had the experience of writing for movies, and I knew that some things are going to work this way and not that way. For people who do not have more difficult, and it helped me that I had that experience. And we changed many things. Actually, what we changed, it was we completely changed the settings, the story world. But we kept and saved the main concept. But it is possible, and it is also a great thing to find that you can change, for example, whole world, time and topos in the story, and you still keep the story. It's way more difficult to change main character. For example, you can't do you can't make introvert into extrovert. It's way more difficult than changing the story world. For example, zombie world into a normal world. It is more possible than the changing the characters and their desires. This is what I found, and that screenplay now is succeeding pretty much, and I'm happy of it because I learned many things through this adaptation process.
Cool. Jen, what do you think? Did you learn anything through your adaptation process with any of your
Oh
projects?
my gosh. Yeah, so much. And I've done a couple of different projects where we've taken material and really played in those worlds. Sometimes literally. I created a project called Monsters and Fables, which was a D&D show based around the Grimm's fairy tale, like fairy tale characters, and kind of playing with those worlds, but having the freedom of people to control them and make choices while maintaining a fairy tale framework. But I think absolutely it's easier to change. You discover you can't be precious about things. But also so much of it is just about serving the story and figuring out what the essence of that story is. Like you look at something like the HBO Watchmen, and that is Watchmen. It feels like Watchmen. It's taken the most important themes of the graphic novel of, this alternate present, near future, alternate history, challenging the status quo, digging into these social issues and political issues. And that's what they're doing. And they've taken those elements that were so unique to the book, the external sources and the multiple books within the book, and that all translated for TV without ever taking almost anything that was in the original. But you look at it, and I know all of us were skeptical as soon as we heard they were doing a Watchmen TV show. Everyone kind of went, why? And as soon as we started watching, everyone goes, okay. I'm gonna just sit here with my foot in my mouth because it felt more like Watchmen than anything could.
Yeah. Phenomenal.
And it was because it was taking the soul of the story, the essence of the story, rather than the literal trappings of the story. So I think whenever you're playing with those things, you have to be flexible in finding the best way to maintain those elements.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting segue to one of the next things I wanted to talk about. And that is when you are taking someone else's baby, someone else's maybe, life's work, and you're adapting it, and your name's going to be on it now. And you have to stand behind what you're putting out there. How do you balance being true to that soul of the piece that maybe you fell in love with and made you want to adapt it, but also doing something that is going to make it speak to your artistic soul? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, with Skin and Earth, we were really fortunate that Lights was really on board with everything we were doing, and understood that TV is a different medium than a graphic novel and a concept album. And that, when you have a narrowly focused story that really has three characters in it, for a TV show in the long term, that's not going to work. You need more world than that. And so that we were going to have to expand, but part of that was a dialogue of what thematically are the most important things to you, so that we can make sure we're serving your story. And these are the things that we think are the most important to us, as we're working on it. I was working on it with my writing partner, Jay Bushman. And that was a conversation. We had a number of times where we would write and say, hey, we're making these changes to this character, we're adding this element, and what do you think would be, how would this interact in the world? How do you think this is are these gods? Are these, actual evolved forces? Really just asking questions when we needed to, but to let her know that we had her interest at heart and we wanted to serve that story, but also recognizing what the medium calls for and what has to change to make it work.
I like that. Either of you have more to add? More thoughts?
I had a couple of scary moments where the very first adaptation I did was out of it was King Kirby related. It's co-written with my husband who's written for Marvel and still does and is the author of Action Philosophers and Comic Book History of Comics and tells the story of comic book creators and history through comics. And when we wanted to do, he originally wrote a draft of King Kirby, and I had given so many notes of it, this play about Jack Kirby, like 10 years ago, because he was very passionate about it. I got a draft back with my name on it. And he's like, okay, great, you're the co-writer. I was like, okay. And so then we began actively rewriting it. When it was ready, there was a comic book festival here in Brooklyn at the Brick Theater, awesome independent theater. And that was the play they were going to do. And Comic Book History of Comics had come out that told the story of Jack. The lawsuit was still out between Jack and Marvel, the Kirby family. And I remember Fred getting a phone call, and all I heard was the other end of the phone call. And he got off the phone and he said, it was the lawyers from Marvel. And he said, he was like, we can't do the play. He's like, and I was like, what? And we had the whole cast, we had everything. We had the director. And I was on the phone with the person running the festival, Roger Nasser, God bless his soul. He's like, oh, Crystal, we just wanted you and Fred to work together and do something with comics and you do theater. I know, Roger, I know. And if only there was something, and I was like, yeah. And then all of a sudden, Action Philosophers popped in my head. And this is a 300, let's just remind ourselves, I don't know if you don't look it up after to enhance the story. It's a 360-page graphic novel that I know intimately. This is a fringe festival, it's like 60 minutes, it's going up in 3 weeks. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll just adapt Action Philosophers. And Roger's like, that's a great idea. It's the same thing. We took the same cast. We took everybody, because, it's a comic book on stage. And wow, that was high pressure. I didn't realize what I got myself into. This is my husband's work. He lives in my house. There's no, he was so kind. It was so great. And actually, I think it helped pave our working relationship for King Kirby. But that, I was sweating it. And I'll never forget when he saw one draft, and I think Ayn Rand had pulled a gun on Karl Marx. And it was like, you don't understand me, or there was some version of this. And I was watching Fred at this rehearsal. I was like, ooh, Fred Van Lente, my husband, the writer and of the original material. And he just said, yeah, how you're intercutting the philosophers? Maybe just go back to putting their stories together. So there's the 6 stories. And I was like, yeah, why don't we do that? That'll be great. And that was it. I was like, I'll take this note. Excellent. And it ended up being a huge success. For the cast was so disillusioned at that moment. The last thing I'll say, just to add this funny story, in the stage version, they were so scared that they thought we were surprised it sold out. We were surprised that people were laughing. this is a comedy. And I'll never forget their eyes. They look scared. They were like, oh my God, why are they laughing? Is this funny? And I was like, oh my God, it's working. I was like, but they don't know it's working, but that's okay because it's somehow working. So, from there, then, Mary and Max, Bobby Cronin came to me because he fell in love with that film. He felt like it spoke to his soul, which was so beautiful. I did too. And these other experiences happened. But I think that newbie experience where I just stumbled into this and high stakes, possibly could have ruined my relationship, just kind of put it all to perspective, and at the end of the day, if you're working with people that respect you, there's that too. I think it's a lot about collaboration.
Love that. Zaza, have you had any experience working with other people's, like adapting other people's work?
Yes, I had experience of adapting one short story which was not mine. It was a classic one, but here I had the main challenge to deal with jumping in the time, because in verbal form, you go inside a character's head, and the character can recall some things from past during the internal monologue, for example. But in visual form, you can't jump that easily into times. In times, it sometimes feels like if you do some flashbacks, it's not a good way to say things. So what happened in the past, you need some complex or no other more creative ways. But I'm often asked to rewrite or make final drafts from others' works, and uh, what I learned from this, when somebody likes something that I dislike, and actually, if you're professional, if you're experienced writer, you easily catch things that does not fit the story. If you're doing it often, you learn how to do this, and you know what to do to any kind of stories. I found a way how to communicate with those writers, which is if they like something that I dislike, for example, I offer to emphasize it even more, because it does not feel, if you emphasize it even more, it does not feel like it's a mistake. It's for some reason. So this always goes well when you say, okay, you like it, okay, let's start with this. For example, scene. If somebody talks inappropriate, for example, the character which their manner of talking does not fit that character, for example, I say you have to start this scene with that character and show more details about him, and it works, I think, as my experience says. Um, so actually, there is one uh, writer from Israel, Edgar Garrett. Maybe you heard of him. Uh, you know, he said once that when I'm asked people often tell me what they did to your stories, to your books, uh, into adaptation. Also, people did not like the adaptation. I always answer that if you go to the bookstore and ask for my book, they will show you, and you will see that there's nothing happened to my book. It's the same. So this is my attitude to this topic. I think. Um, as Jennifer said, what we have to do is to keep the spirit of the work, and then everything is possible.
Yeah, that's interesting because adaptations are they're not necessarily collaborative because you're not always working directly with the creator, but yet you are in conversation with their original piece. Um, Sometimes, depending on the adaptation, but if you're bringing it to the screen for like a major motion picture, that is going to be the experience a lot of people have, and arguably most will have. Yet the original remains, and it remains sort of untouched by you. But of course, those two pieces are always going to be in conversation with each other. So it's endlessly fascinating, and we talk about this on the podcast a lot. And one thing you pointed out too was some of the changes that you see when people are trying to adapt, and so often I see voiceover in adaptation, and it sometimes it's okay, but often it feels like, well, maybe they should have found a way to do this visually because we're in a film, and instead they just kind of leaned into, well, that's the voice of the narrator from the book, and we're just going to put it in the movie. So what kind of challenges like that come up when you're shifting mediums, and what do you see as like maybe the easy way versus like the more skillful way to make that transition in any of the mediums that you have worked in?
Uh, I don't know. For example, voiceover and flashbacks are more hateful things for movie lovers, because movie is visual narration, which means you have to show, not to tell. Telling is a verbal thing. So showing means that you have to mean something, not to tell. So, for example, if you want to say something about the character, you have to do it in motion, in action. So certain times voiceovers are the most difficult things to change when shifting the medium. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, you're in the mind of the character, and in a film, like you're usually, perhaps fundamentally not. Like you're almost an impartial viewer through a camera lens, and you can play with that, obviously, but you can't have those direct thoughts, or at least it feels like cheating a little bit when you do get them,
For
at least
example,
to me.
you can say I'm sad in the book, and it's absolutely normal.
Yeah.
You understand that he said you don't need anything else. You believe the character, and in the movie you can do that. The character don't say sad. You can show. You have to show in the motion, in any visual ways the character is sad, and make it believable.
Yeah, if your character's saying I'm sad, they probably should actually be happy in that moment. That's the only time you want somebody to be that explicit, is when something else is actually happening. But I think that's a really important point. Yeah, the don't, just because there is beautiful language and description in a book, you don't need to feel obligated to take those exact words and make sure that they are in your piece. I mean, it's hard to imagine some things without certain phrases being involved. But at their core, you really are trying to find what those words are forming, or what those images, or what those sounds, and how that can be expressed in the medium you're working with. If you're working in a musical, you need songs to happen at moments where feelings are too big to be contained in speech. So where are those moments in whatever you're adapting? If you're working in, I mean, all sorts of things, but playing with the essence of who your characters are, what your medium is, what your genre and tone are, and then finding how you can plug those in using the things that are special about the medium you're working in.
Yeah, I like that. Crystal, with the play side of this, is there different concerns, or is this the kind of stuff you deal with too?
Yeah, well, I've been using the techniques of kind of similar to what you were saying, Jennifer, is that when does it play against it? And it can be quite magical if it plays against it. Like, so for me, Fleabag is a great example of her connection with the viewer. And I think it's about the connection with the viewer as well. So another thing I like to show my students, I'm just obsessed with it. I like to watch it myself, like just the first 3 minutes, is The Big Lebowski. I just think that is a masterful, again, if it's about telling of the tale in a certain way, and there's reveals that are interesting and enhance and bring us in and surprise us, or we are watching Fleabag through these moments. He's turning us not to while explicit sexual acts are happening sometimes, that help us understand from her point of view as a woman and this particular character. It's incredibly exciting. I think audio, if we go to audio and then back to TV film, which is kind of the route it turns out I'm taking, as my stuff for TV is being pitched from the audio dramas coming out. Voiceover there can be so neat because you're so in the head, and you can play with it in a really cool way where it interrupts the scene in a way that's really neat. So you can have like ba 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 ba, and then like you can go into someone's head, and there's just something really delightful about that. And stealing from some of those techniques in other mediums, I think is really, really cool. In general with plays, actually, I try to, always emphasize killing the narrator. I just posted today, I don't know why I was thinking of it, with Scott Rudin is been, at least had come out and said he's not going to be in the room of Broadway theaters, which is a big deal for us. There's a lot of fear going back. And I just thought of that scene from Into the Woods where they all look at the narrator. The original, I don't know if anyone's ever seen it before it became a film, and then we lost this moment because there was no narrator. So this was actually where a loss didn't work, because this is the huge payoff, is that he's like, then the giant's going to kill them, and they look at him and he's like, no, you can't kill me, I'm outside the story, someone has to tell the story. And Bernadette Peters, the original witch, literally looks at him and says, some of us don't like the way you've been telling it. And then they just kill him, And I think, everyone, you just don't want to lean on narration. I do think it's fascinating, and that's probably a whole other, panel, would be to just look at every pilot of TV shows in which the voiceover narration has been used. In most cases, it's been dropped, just because they didn't need it, and they were just trying to sell the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, like, there's always exceptions to this, right? Like, I can think of whatever you think of the movie, but American Psycho, it's so essential to have that inner monologue, right? Like, it would be very difficult to adapt that film without it, because so much of it is going on inside the head. So of course it can be done, but that doesn't mean it should always be done.
I think though what the difference is for me is knowing character and knowing who your POV is, where you're coming from, and whose story you're telling, and from whose perspective. Because the problem with narration is it's often a person who's not directly involved in the story. If the person is directly involved in the story, they should be living the story, not going, when I was young, or, I'm going to tell you the story of this thing, and that happened to me. Whereas, in American Psycho, you're examining an unreliable character and an unreliable narrator and an unreliable reality. And so having narration perpetuates that, because you're not sure who to trust and where you're going. But, the flip side of that is, when you use narration in anything, it makes that narrator unreliable in some ways. So if it's not your lead character, who is telling the story, and is there a way to actually experience it from their perspective, rather than have them kind of be this omniscient, voice in the machine?
And I'm now recalling the Fight Club,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a voiceover which works also, but I think that's because Psycho and the Tyler Durden also have that psychological problems. So this is interesting. This is kind of when you're doing voiceover, you have to create a necessity for this. And I think in the American Psycho and Fight Club, this is quite well.
Yeah, I like that. That it is. If you read either of those books, it does feel like, well, you're going to have to do this when you adapt it, because the soul of the book would be gone if you would try to not do that. So yeah, it's probably like, if you're adapting something that has inner monologue, but it's not at the core of the story in the same way, then maybe it's best to avoid it. I like that a lot. Okay, so one of the main things that we hear on my podcast from people all the time, it's like the kind of easiest criticism you get from fans who've read the book, right, is they want to like judge the adaptation based off of faithfulness, and whether it was faithful or not. And it's interesting to see how that's interpreted, because that's not always the same way that I might interpret it. But I think faithfulness is a really interesting point to discuss, because it's kind of impossible in some ways when you change mediums to stay faithful. But often that's what fans think they want. I don't know if they actually do want it. But yeah, how do you walk the line? How do you appease the hardcore fans who want something faithful, yet appeal to the new medium and what is necessary to make the story work in that medium?
You can't write for fans. I mean, you have to create the project on its own merits and write the story for the story's sake. The second you start concerning yourself with, are the fans going to be upset that we cut this scene? I mean, look at Lord of the Rings. You know, this is arguably the ultimate adaptation of our time, right? This is a practically unadaptable book that was made into 3 films and really created that kind of, well, 5 films. It depends what you want to include in all of this. And now a TV show. But you know, you still have people upset that Tom Bombadil's not in there, and you're guys, you have so many hours. Do you really want every single step of this? Do you really want to have dwarven lineage as part of your film? No, you want to watch the things that you want to watch on a screen. You can read the things that you want to read in the book, but you have to write the story that needs to be written for what you are creating, rather than, you know, to me it's what is the essence of the story, and it always is going to come back to that. If you put it in a crucible, what comes out?
I have an intimate relationship with fans, and I completely agree, Jennifer. I would say that just because my naturalism is fandom, because I while I was writing, coming up in theater, and just starting to write film, really didn't start to crack in until the past couple of years, I would say, in terms of the merit. I was a booth babe, you know. Fred was going around signing at conventions, and then we wrote together for Adventure Time, and we wrote Eat Fighter for Webtoon, and so now we're signing things together, and those things would happen. But you know, that was a long period of my life, and I became fascinated by cosplayers. I wrote a play about it called Geek. And I think what it is, but it's the best when you know, it's like My Fair Lady. You're like in the square, and like no one knows you're there, and you're listening, you know. But observing the vulnerability and excitement of people playing out a story, and why is helpful. It's not helpful if they know you're adapting it. It's like if you can be a fly in the wall and really understand, just kind of listen, not to plot points or anything, because you know, fans in general might have great ideas about plot and everything, but then they should go write it, right? They're like, that's their kind of feeling about it. You can't follow any of that stuff. And that's why I get so upset about the spoilers conversation. I understand it, I respect it, but I've been at parties where it's like, well, you know, Mindy and I aren't going to watch this for 6 months. And so while we're at this barbecue, we're all gonna have an oath that we won't talk about. I mean, just like, I can't. 6 months. I mean, stop. Like, we have to be respectful as well about your time and also my time. Like, I wasn't frozen for 6 months. So, like, but the ultimate thing I have a problem with, that, to come back to the fandom perspective of plot, is if you're only watching it for plot, you don't really care about these other things, because I can watch the same film over and over again and be surprised when I know what's going to happen, when the characters are rich and the story is surprising. So, you know, I just think that it's apples and oranges a little bit there. But the fans can remind you of why you said yes, of why you're there. And I think that's a beautiful thing. They will ultimately be more happy that you make something that lets other people in. Because if you don't do that, you will lose everybody, and the project will die, and this thing that they wanted to live on and have other seasons or get made into other things, or maybe have more of a life, or will not be there anymore the way they wanted. And so ultimately they'll be more disappointed by that. And the last thought I'll have with that is that maybe it's something about, especially now that we're, you know, all with all the possibilities of more interactive work, around a project, around a TV show, around a film, they can have it. There's going to be the video game where they get to do that. And there's going to be the online component where they get to, there's going to be the podcast where they get to hear that. So I think there's a little bit more freedom now. Like there was such a preciousness 10 years or so ago with like, this has to be the thing. But I think people are a little bit understanding. I love WandaVision. I like this part. I like this part. Well, hang in, because other stuff's gonna happen, and we'll see what happens. And you could read the comics.
Yeah, I love that. So that the faithfulness question, it always reminds me that like the people who are asking it don't always even know what they're looking for, because so often to me it seems like they want it to feel the same. They want the character to maybe live up to something that was in their mind, and maybe only in their mind. So often not only is it impossible, but they actually do want that like crucible to happen, and then what comes out of the crucible to be the thing that is familiar to them. But some adaptations aren't like that. Some adaptations transform. And you were talking about the Watchmen. It is a good example of that. There's others. Off the top of my head, like Jaws, for example, is a completely different ending that was completely reimagined for the film. So like sometimes it is not a faithful change,
The Shining?
yet it can. Yeah, The Shining, which Stephen King fans, many of them detest that film, but many people really love it. And I like both the film and the book. And yeah, that the discussion surrounding that film is really interesting because of these questions of faithfulness. And then you had two like really strong-minded creatives who wanted to do their own things with it. So yeah, that's an endlessly fascinating one. So yeah, like what are the other things that are important when you're adapting something besides faithfulness? I think we've already talked about like making it work in the medium, right? Like what is necessary for that for each of you when you're adapting it to your mediums? Kind of a big question. So if I want to take a stab
Good
at it.
question.
Yeah.
I
Any
think
thoughts?
it is the plot beats, so called. For example, in Shining, we have many layers. Even Stephen King did not like the adaptation, the movie.
Yeah.
Nobody liked from the beginning when it was launched, but now we love both after some time, because it was made into a typical psychological thriller, but there was so deep layers of monologues of alcoholism and other topics, which is removed that much. But we still love it because the plot beats of that book was that thriller elements, so it worked. So I think what we have to do is to find the most important bits of the plot and keep them and take care of them.
I like that. Yeah, it's like embracing the change, right? And going into the podcast, one of the things that you always hear from people is they'll come to you and say, "Oh, the book's always better," and that that's I understand why people say that. We haven't found that to be the case on our podcast. Often it's not, surprisingly often, and I think that's an interesting. I don't know, like why do people say that? You think? Is it just like that's the first thing they experienced, or is there something particular about the book?
You have more space and you usually have more time in the book. It's you're reading it over a longer time period than you're absorbing a film. You're looking at, days or weeks with the book, hundreds of pages, whereas you're looking at an hour and a half, 2 hours with a film. TV shows, you get more, which is part of why TV is wonderful for telling stories. And I think why a lot of TV adaptations have done very well in terms of story, because they've just been able to be additive rather than, I don't want to say reductive because that's not accurate, but really having to choose what to focus on. But I think, yeah, with a book, you have full imaginative play with what things are, and the same way that with horror it's always going to be scarier, what you imagine is always going to be scarier than once you show the monster. with any book, whatever you imagine is always going to be tailor-made to your taste. Whereas once someone has made decisions on costumes and, you know, how this dialogue is going to be spoken, then it may not be the way you imagined it. So it's no longer your custom version of that story. It is whatever they have decided is the version that they're putting out of that story.
Yeah. Crystal, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think these are great. This is such a so deep. This is so great. All these observations. I would say that, Jennifer, you were making me think that, also everyone has their own, to put these thoughts together. I also, I think, the story beats, are there, in to address that really quick. I think that then when you go to each medium, they can hold or be done more successfully. So the repetition of beats is different in each medium. So in a musical, I can have someone like pass a stage, sing 2 lines of a reprise with a suitcase, and we know they're leaving. But that might have been a whole scene. That might have been a whole scene in a film or a TV show, or but I can do it in 10 seconds because it's going to hold that way in a certain way. Or this, something could even revolve, or somebody could appear. Or think, there's just things, different ways it could happen live that just reach an audience in a different way. So, but then to come back to the book and that relationship when you're looking at a book, yeah, it is an unfair thing because it's like you have a relationship with a whole other lover in a sense and this lover came to you at night and was like, I'll come every night and we'll have this experience, and it could take a year or it could take 6 months or we'll be on the train. And there's no way to win with a ticking clock of something you've had to make that happens in 90 minutes or 2 hours. It's an unfair comparison. And because the level of judgment of sitting in something, and that happens with film, even though you can go get your big gulp, and in theater you can go get something, but people look at you. But it's there's such judgment when we're like, I don't like that. I'm sitting that. Oh, what is it? Oh, this I don't. Oh, and so there's this kind of thing. And sometimes you love something and then you leave and you're like, what happened? There's a lot I loved about Rent, and I remember clapping when I saw the original. And I remember leaving and be like, she is a lot. What? I'm confused. She came back from the dead. Like, what happened? Just story-wise, what happened? Like, I was so moved, but like, what actually happened? What he wanted a restaurant in Santa Fe? Like, I don't remember that. Like before, it came out of nowhere. Like, but at the time, I was like, this is the greatest thing of all. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes I was very harsh on Wicked when I saw it. Like you just have these different feelings when you're living in something live. And film too, because you're with a group and your friends. I don't know. It's intense.
Wicked is that was such a shock to the system compared to the book. You want to talk about an adaptation?
That's
it went from really adult, deeply political, fractured fairy tale on a whole other level, to like popcorn Steven Schwartz musical.
Yeah.
You're like, oh yay!
To a sleepover. I mean, a lot of it's like a big anime sleepover.
I mean, popular alone, you're just going, what how, what? But I enjoy it. It's a good time. The songs are fun.
I do want to get to, we had one question real quick before we run out of time. Curtis C. Chen, hi Curtis. He asks, any upcoming adaptations to or from any medium that you're excited about or dreading?
Dune.
I'm
very excited. Yeah, I think everything I have seen, the casting, the visual, everything just so far. I'm a huge Dune fan, and I'm very wary of anybody touching it. But I am thrilled with everything I've seen, and have hopefully not foolishly optimistic.
Yeah, Denis Villeneuve, I'm excited for him to get to it. Anyone else have anything they're looking forward to or dreading?
Dune is cool, and Blade Runner was super cool. One of the top, I'd say.
I thought it was a really interesting. 2049 was really fascinating adaptation. Yeah. Crystal, you have any?
Geez, I think the pandemic froze my brain on that because I've been watching and processing things in such different ways. I think though, This is total tangent, but I don't know. Joe Bob, does anybody watch Joe Bob? I'm excited it's back on Shudder. And so that's kind of the opposite about older weird horror movies, or not necessarily older, but like, cult. I've been enjoying watching those again. And then they often talk about the remakes from those and things like that. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I've been on the pulse of exactly what's coming out in terms of
Mhm.
the new adaptations, because there's been such a scramble in our world to make, pitch, sell, as well at the same time, of going. I want to go back to a movie theater. I haven't got back to a movie theater
Yeah,
yet.
I think we
On the
all
horror
do.
thing, Candyman too. The new
Oh
Candyman is
yeah,
going to be
yeah.
Oh,
amazing,
Very
cool.
I
exciting.
think.
I'm excited for the Shadow and Bone adaptation that's coming out on Netflix soon. That is our next project on Ink to Film, so I'll shout that out. We are basically out of time. Thank you everybody for coming to this panel. I'd like to go around and give everybody a chance to let people know where to find you online. For me, we are at Ink to Film on all of the social medias. I am at Luminous Luke on Twitter. We also have a website, inktofilm.com. Crystal?
Awesome. I'm Crystal Skillman everywhere on all the medias, on Insta, and I like Insta the most because Facebook blocks your algorithm, not as much fun. And I'm on Twitter, and you could find more about the King Kirby podcast about Jack Kirby at King Kirby Play at Insta and at King Kirby Play on Twitter.
Zaza?
I am Zaza Koshkadze, on Instagram and Facebook. I don't have any websites for my works.
Okay. And Jennifer?
You can find me on Twitter as at Dreamwisp, DREAMWISP. On Twitch, I stream as DreamWispGen. Tuesdays from 4 to 6 Pacific. You can find me on Heroes of the Plains on twitch.tv/DemiPlaneRPG. It's an ongoing campaign. And speaking of adaptations, our characters from that show are now video game characters, which is
Oh, that
amazing,
is so
in
cool.
Idle Champions. Yeah, so it's been an amazing ride on that stuff. And this
Great.
was a blast. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
having us.
Thank you for joining me, and thanks to everybody who watched. All right. Have a good con.
Awesome. Thank you so much.